Okay. With this one, I'm going over some basic redstone and some basic logic gates, so I can do a video on an automatic loader and sorter that I've worked on in one of my Minecraft worlds. I've done it on the PC, it shouldn't be a problem on it. But to get to the automatic loader and unloader, as well as every item that you toss into it, and sorts each of them into their individual crates or chests in this case. To get there, you have to know a little bit about redstone and then just a minor thing about programming in general. The first one is to understand that basically when you're working with redstone, it affects items that can take actions. This TNT, for example, its action is to explode, so in other words, it can be powered. These sticky pistons, their action is to actually push something up, or to well, with the sticky piston, it pushes and also pulls, and you can see the difference here when they retract. This one is the regular piston, so it doesn't pull it back. So in other words, if you want to push something forward and have it stay forward, this is the one you'd use. Sticky piston, however, sticks to it, so it brings it back. So in other words, if you want to create a situation in which you want a block to move forward and move backwards, you'd use a sticky piston. One moment while the phone rings. There's other things that can be powered, like redstone lamps, and an interesting thing which is similar to this redstone is a change of state, which a change of state is basically that a block changes its environment or its physical being from one to another. Like when that happened, that also triggers or can trigger certain things to fire off. There's an older design, which was before they introduced basically a daylight sensor, in which used these type of blocks to actually trigger pistons, which I might get into that later. With the updates to Minecraft, it kind of does things differently, so that may or may not work on the PS4 version, but it works on the the PC version. First thing to start off with such a gate is simple input-output. Oh, and also that I'll get to that later. If you have a situation in which there's no power going into it, consider this your input and this your output. So if the output is off or false in terms of logic, the inputs false or off, then the output will also be false or off. In this state, the input is true or on, leading the output to be true or on. And there are a couple different ways you can display this in terms of buttons, pressure plates, and levers. And each of these do slightly different thing. The pressure plate is what you would use if you want something to stand on it or you want an item to be on it. For example, if you want to toss an item into a slot and have that item or a certain amount of items, depending upon how you program it, to turn on a light or to open a door. As long as you're on it, then the input is on. Once you're off of it or the items are off of it, then the input is off. A lever is one in which you can maintain a state without actual physical input or having something physically on it. If it is switched off, then the input is off, thus the output is off. Once you switch it on, the input is on and the output is also on. Use this for situations in which you want to maintain it, such as a door. The only disadvantage to this is that this will remain on so long as the switch is pulled. Whereas with the pressure plate, if the item decayed and if, say for example, you toss an item onto it, such as this, eventually that item will decay and disappear. And once it does, then the pressure on the plate will release and it will turn to an off state again. Same with a person. As long as the person standing on it is powered. Once they're off, it's off. This one maybe. This is a basic tripwire. You've probably seen it in certain pre-builds inside the single player. Once you walk over it, it powers something for brief seconds. Normally not the put a lamp closer. Normally it would trigger that. Most of the time it's used with these dispensers to fire arrows. I'm trying to remember exactly how it fires. There we go. The power basically goes up here and makes it up. Which means basically this was fired, this was triggered for 1 moment. I'll toss this in here. And the dispenser will work. So it fires out each item. The same thing is true with a dropper, but how the two work are slightly different. See, as that fires the arrow. whereas a dropper would just basically drop it at the front of it. So in other words, if you wanted to create a situation in which you want it to drop a potion, you could do so. But you're going to want to use, say for example, a splash potion. And it's also, think of it as roulette. It will take an item out of here at random. So you don't know if you're going to get the potion or the arrow. In that case it's the arrow. In that case it's the potion. The dropper just drops the item. It doesn't actually trigger with some of the items, such as an arrow. The arrow fires with the dispenser. So I'll do that again. This time the arrow will fire and the potion should throw and splash. See? It actually is the same thing that the dispenser is the same thing as actually using, throwing the potion, or in the case of an arrow, firing the arrow with a bow. In that case it missed me, but that's the basic idea behind it. This is something if you want to actually trigger one thing, such as I said, you want to have a situation in which you want someone to walk by something, such as a trap, and have an arrow fire at them. Like the pressure pad, it's on as long as you're standing on it. But you also notice there's a slight flickering, which slightly true here too, but that's just a pack thing. Okay, never mind that part. But the difference between a pad is that this sort of triggers once. So in other words, I guess you could say the two are similar. Only this one requires 3 items. And it also is limited in exactly how you set it up. You can put water, you can put a pressure pad under water, for example, but it doesn't always work here. So this is because it destroys it. Okay, so we've handled basic input-output. The next thing to actually look over is what is known as an inversion, or also known as a NOT gate. What that is, you can think of these in terms of English if it helps. With a NOT gate, you want the reverse to happen. In other words, if it is powered, you want no power to actually go into something. If it's not powered, you actually do want power to go in something. So basically you're saying not this, or not on. With this one, the key to it is to actually use 2 power sources, and these switches are basically considered power sources for the intent of on off or any other situation. The redstone is considered in a switch in that it's always on, whereas this switch is a switch that you can turn on and off. So they're both, in essence, these two are the same thing. The only difference is you could turn this one on and off, but you cannot turn this one off. However, you can reverse a switch using a redstone lamp. What this means is that this switch is currently on an off position. This redstone switch takes the off position and switches it to an on position, basically meaning that if there's no power going into it, then the redstone lamp will be on, leading this lamp to be on. If you were to turn on the power, that means the redstone lamp is receiving an on signal. It interprets this on signal as a way to tell it to turn itself off. And you can perhaps see it better right here when you see a redstone lamp on top of one another. This redstone lamp is sending power upward through this block. And this is also one thing that you'll want to consider when you're building. Power actually it's not as direct as what you might think it is. It's also indirect. And you can actually see in part how it works. That power actually goes upwards in certain situations. Whereas this is a direct link, this is what you could consider an indirect link. Because this power is actually empowering this block, if that makes any sense. And this power signal extends upward, but it only extends to a certain amount. So when you're programming, you're going to have to consider that, and that you could actually alter the coding to your program. But this is basically what it is. This power lamp is then power upward to this lamp. It's receiving an on signal, so basically it interprets it that it should switch itself off. When you're sending power into a redstone lamp, but however it doesn't always work that way. You'll see here. In this case, it's a situation in which you have this redstone lamp is sending power this way to this one, and this redstone lamp is sending power in this direction. However, the thing is, they're both sending power both ways, so in other words, they're not exactly interpreting what the other are. You can think of this as basically flooding it, or well, I guess flooding is the best way you could actually consider it. Because neither of these two can actually read one another. The difference between I have over here with the block is that I put one block here and a redstone lamp on the other side. This redstone lamp is not actually powering anything. It's receiving signals, and the signal it's receiving is from this redstone lamp. And it's basically telling it to turn itself off. Creating a NOT gate. Once I remove this redstone lamp, this redstone lamp is now powered because it's receiving no signals at all. And this would be true if you didn't have anything hooked up to it. The same is also true if you were to use the pressure pad. While you're standing on the pressure pad, the power output is on, turning the redstone lamp on the other side of this block off. Thus, no power is going to the lamp. while you're off of it. Then actually there's no signal going into this redstone lamp, so it's powered. This is a situation in which if you want something on or want something open until somebody steps onto it. So this could even be a trap, for example. You want to leave a door open and you want to set up a situation in which if the person steps anywhere in, say for example this hallway, if this were a hallway, if this would actually close the door, denying them entrance. And there are other different ways you want to do it, depending upon how you combine this knot and how you combine simple input-output. You get to more complex logic gates such as ANDs, ORs, exclusive, and with ORs it's exclusive and inclusive. And it gets a little bit complicated with that one. But that's also a good way that you can actually build a door with a switch both on the inside and outside. You have XORs, NORs, which NOR is basically a reverse NOR, reverse OR, a not OR. So in other words, in terms of English, a NOR is not this or this. And there's also an exclusive NOR, which exclusive NOR is basically, if you are thinking in terms of English, either this input or this input, but not both. So in other words, if one input is on or one input is true, and the other input is false, then the output is true, or we'll get into that, I suppose. But the thing is, if both of them are on with an exclusive OR, that means the output is off. The next gate to think about, and this one can have more than two, but the simplest version of it is to think of it as in terms of two inputs. From there you can actually increase the number of inputs. Now the AND gate is the situation in which you want to have two inputs, input A and input B. If input A and input B are both true or on, then you want your output to be on, thus powering wherever you're working with. If one is true, say for example, input A is true, but B is false, then you don't want power going into it. And the same is true if input A is false and input B is true. And these two are not the same thing. It's important to remember that. And of course, if both of them are off, let's turn this one off and this one off, then both of them will be off. Now there's one I didn't use immediately, and that is the button. The button only powers it for a very short time. Sorry for forgetting. For a few seconds. You can delay this, of course, but that'll get into that. Actually, I'll go through that now. Each of these signals only can go for a certain amount of distance before you need to boost them. And you can tell the strength of the signal by how bright it is. For example, by the time that the signal gets to here, there's no signal whatsoever. But this can be boosted with a redstone repeater. However, using these redstone repeaters slightly delays the signal. In other words, each time you have one of these, it's just very minute delay, which you can extend by moving it into one of these positions, moving the switch. That works into this AND button, in which if you were to delay the signal slightly, that means this would remain on longer. If you're quick enough, then you can see the power making it to the lamp. But these signals are only a very short amount of time. Now I'll use this on the longest delay to show you this. The signal is not slowed that much. If you want to slow it further, you'd have to use more repeaters on the slowest setting. But you can actually see how each of these delays the signal. And each delay is more and more. Think of it as addition. If this were +4 delay, then by the time you get here it's +8 delay. You can also use it with other ones, but it's harder. With a pressure plate and using an AND gate, what happens is that you need 2 people, or you need to use a pressure plate which will accept a certain amount of items, or will be triggered by items in order for it to work. You can also mix it up. The input means doesn't have to be the same. This is an example of which you're using a button and a switch. In other words, you want to have a situation in which if this switch is turned, then you can press this button and, say for example, open a door or turn a lamp on. But you need this switch on for that to work. As long as the switch is on, then you're actually able to power something with the press of a button or standing on a weight. Either one is varied. Now how this works basically is that think of it with in terms of NOR and knots. It can get slightly confusing. What this means is basically when both of these are off, this is reversed. This signal is reversed and it turns on. Both of these signals ensure that this redstone lamp will be off. And I'll turn one of them off. If I turn, say for example, one is true and one is false, one is off, one is on, then I've still got this redstone lamp sending an on signal to this redstone lamp right here, ensuring that it's off. The only way that this redstone lamp will be on is if both of these redstone lamps, these NOT gates, are off. Thus meaning both of the signals or inputs are true or on. because this redstone lamp right here is not receiving any signals to tell it turn myself off. So there's, in this situation, of the 4 different outputs that you could have, only one of them will actually work, or one of them will actually send a signal. Now this is maybe a situation in which there may be a situation in which you want something on or off. So in other words, it's not something that you can actually say one is a good situation, one's a bad situation. It's just how many different outcomes do you want? If you want an outcome in which both switches have to be on, in other words, for it to work, then an AND gate is probably what you're looking for. However, if one switch is on, one switch is off, or both of them are off, you don't want any power to go to it, then this too is what you want. But the same is also true in reverse. If you want a situation in which you don't want anything to happen, if both of these switches are on, but in any other state, one off, one on, or both off, you actually do want something to happen, this can help you as well. And you may need to use an inverter along with it, but that also depends on what state you want your output to be in. In other words, if you want the output to be off, then the AND will give you 3 different situations in which the output will be off. So in other words, when you're thinking about these gates, you have to think about outputs in terms of how many different environments or how many different situations do you want, and in what situations do you want the input to be. The next one to this is the NAND version of it, the NOT version of AND, which is called NAND. That's basically a short way of saying not this and that. In this case, this is the reverse of the AND gate, and the simple way that you get to a NAND gate is simply take out one of the inverters. And all 3 of these redstones are considered NOT gates. So basically, you create an AND gate by using 3 NOT gates or 3 inverters. But you create a NAND gate, you only need 2 inverters. And the NAND gate is basically the opposite of this. When both inputs are on with a NAND gate, then you have no power going to your output. Since basically, in terms of English, what you're saying is not A and not B. It's the simplest way to actually think of it that way. But going into the other different ways the inputs can actually be entered, you get into a different situation. Like I said, the opposite of AND. In this case, you have not A but B, which leads to this redstone lamp being powered. Because basically what you're saying in that situation is that A is on and B is off. Or A is false and B is true. And the opposite of AND is basically you're saying that with an AND gate, both of them have to be true in order for the output to be true. With a NAND gate, you have to think it in reverse, that as long as one of the outputs is false, or one of the outputs is inverted, you could think in a certain point of view, then the output is true. Or, if that makes any sense. You're looking for off signals as an input for a NAND gate. And the same is true for the other. Now, A false, B true is not the same thing as A true, B false. Those are two slightly different situations, such as with binary. 1 plus 0 is not the same thing as 0 plus 1. They look the same and they may feel the same, but they're two separate equations. The same is true here. True and true, or on and false. Wait, true and on and off and on are not the same thing. And you can see a little bit more with this physical being. If you could have these switch in different places, but it's easier to see it sometimes with physical switch. Such as this input situation, which off and on, it's not the same thing as this. It sounds simple, but it can be a bit complicated. This is a situation in which both of the switches are off, or yeah, both of the switches are on, which leads to the opposite of the AND gate. Basically, in this situation, you're saying off and off, being roughly the same thing for an AND gate as being on and on. And you can see it a little bit more with this picture, with how the screen looks right here. Both of these inputs equal the same thing. However, getting to from the input to the output is different. With this case, with the AND gate, you have only one situation in which this will be powered. But you have 4 different ways you could do the input. And the other 3 all result in no power going into here. This is the reverse situation in which you have one situation in which no power is going to go into your output. That's not this and this. And 3 different situations in which you will have power. So this depends on how many states you want your switches to be in to give you a desired output. With this one, these 2 inverters ensure that this inverter will be off. So as long as one of these inverters is on, there's no power that can go through it. With a NAND gate, this is not true any longer. What's happening here is that these inverters are taking whatever signal that you put into it and reversing it. So what is happening is that this power goes through. You also have a slight situation which I talked about earlier as a flooding. As long as one of these 2 are on, this will be powered. One of these 2 NOT gates. The situation in which there's no power is a situation in which both of these switches are off. Or both of these switches are on. I'll use a button to actually display this. You can see for a brief moment using a button, when I turn both of these buttons on, for one brief moment, the lamp on the back side will go off. And that basically is showing two on inputs equal an off input. And there are a couple of different ways you can switch things up. Like before, you can use a switch and a button. You know what this is saying is that as long as this switch is off, well, as long as the switch is on actually, you can press this button and turn off something. But otherwise, it will remain on. This switch is this is an off switch, so basically it's switched off, leaving this inverter to be powered on. Nothing happens. So this is pretty useful in a couple ways if you want to trick somebody. If you're building a world in which basically you only want it to be open in a certain way, they could press this as much as they want, it's not going to do anything. And that's because basically the signal is automatically going here, whereas here it would have been inverted. So the only way you can actually do anything with it is to turn the switch off, turn the switch on, inverting this signal, giving you time to turn off the lamp. Each on signal turns it off. The next one is even more complicated because it's split into two different types of gates, and that is OR. And OR is complicated because there are two different versions of the word. And thank you for the donation, I think. And thank you for watching. Now, in terms of OR, there's two different versions of OR. There's an inclusive OR and there's an exclusive OR. Inclusive OR is a situation in which, in terms of English, you want A or B, and both is fine. As long as one of them is true, then the output is true. And both of them can be true. It's not as important with an inclusive OR because basically it's including the inputs of all of them. You could say it's not even as long as one is true, then the output is true. That's the basic way to remember an inclusive OR. Exclusive OR is different. Exclusive OR is a situation in which you want A or B, but you don't want both. Or, in terms of English, we're saying, I want this or this, but not both. I guess that's what I just said before. So in other words, if you have a situation in which, with an exclusive OR, both of the inputs are true, then your output will be false. Even if both of them are true or on. With the inclusive OR means both of them, this or this, are true, you get true. Exclusive OR, if both of them are true, you get false. If both of them are false, you still have false. So in other words, both of them are linked in the way. With an OR gate, you have 4 states in which it could be in. You have on and off and on, and off and off. Of those, 3 of them will give you an on output. 1 of them will give you an off output. On and on, or 1 or on, will give you on and on output, powering whatever you're working with. On or off, or on and off, will give you also an off and on. Both of those two will also give you a powered output. With an exclusive OR, you're looking at a situation in which you have 4 different input states, and of those 4 different output states, only 2 of them will actually give you power. And those deal with the 2 in the center. If you have on and on, then the output for an exclusive OR is off. If you have off and off, the output for the exclusive OR is also off. The only time in which an exclusive OR will give you an output of on is if one of them is off and the other is on. Now to go on with building an OR gate to actually show how it works. And an OR gate is actually pretty simple. This is very similar to a basic input-output to create an OR gate. As long as one of these is on, these switches or redstone lamps, depending upon what you're working with, and you can actually see that by doing it here. As long as one is on, then the output's on. And this is one in which there's only one state in which the redstone lamps can be on. And this is what happens when it's off. And you can have as many inputs as you want with an OR gate before you actually make it. With this, you're working with a situation in which if you want to have many switches, and as long as one switch of these switches is on, it gets powered. It doesn't matter how many you switch on. If you're thinking about this in an inverse way, if you're setting up a maze in which, let's say you want the exit to only open if all the switches are turned off. That's an OR gate would help you with that one. By having them on, say for example, you might need to use an inverter, but to make sure that whatever it is off. But we can actually do that with an OR gate. But this is one way you could actually do it, with an OR gate and an inverter. Okay, the next is a NOR gate. This one is a little bit more compact than the other. Now, a NOR gate is the complete reverse of a NOR gate. As long as one of these inputs is on, you get power. And the reverse is true here. As long as one of these is in the on position, then the power will be off. So basically, this is a situation in which both of them are off. When you're placing a lever, it starts in the off position. Now in this situation, both of these are off, meaning that both of these switches are telling this inverter right here, stay on. However, if one of these is turned on, the power from this switch right here is sending an on signal to this redstone lamp, telling it, turn yourself off. Basically, this redstone lamp is just waiting for a signal. In this situation, in which both of them are off, it's not receiving anything, so it's sending power. In a situation in which it actually does receive power, it turns itself off. This is what I was talking about with, say for example, a maze and a door. If you want to have multiple switches that are on throughout the entire maze, and you want to turn them off to actually open a door, for example, say 5 different switches. Turning off each of these switches would open the door for you. But it's a simple use of an inverter or a NOT gate with an OR gate. And you can do this at various points too. That was just simply a simplified version. This is an OR gate with an inverter, or turn it into a NOR gate. As long as one of these is powered, then there's no signal going to this right here. So in other words, if you want someone to go through a maze, turning off switches, and that would open it. And this depends upon what you're working with and working towards. Now this next one is it's a bit more complicated. This is an exclusive OR gate. Okay, now what this is doing is currently taking two off inputs and giving you an off output. So as long as both of these are off, then you can get an off output. But the same thing is true as if you turn both of these on. You also have an off output. And this is what I meant when I said earlier that an exclusive OR is a situation in which you want one thing to be true, or one thing to be on, or one thing to be on, but you don't want both of them to be on. So in other words, as long as one input is on and the other input is off, then there you have it. It'll be on as long as one input is on and the other is off. So this might help you if you're working with, say for example, a door, or a situation in which you want switches on both sides of, say, a hidden door. There are other different ways you can actually work on it. But the most important thing to remember is that it's a situation in which you want one switch on and you want the other switch off. If you have both of them on, you want your output to be off. In other words, if both switches are on or both switches are off, that'll give you an output of off. Now I've used this for hidden doors. And I've also used the exclusive NOR gate. Now how it does it is basically, this is an off switch. And what it does is it powers this inverter and this inverter at the same time. This inverter sends power to this inverter, turning it off. This one does as well. And it also sends power to this inverter, keeping it off. Now the thing to remember is this inverter. Working backwards, this is the one that is powering it to keep it on, and it's powering it because there's an off signal coming from the middle inverter and this inverter at the same time. Both of them keeping it off. And the same thing is true if you were to reverse it in this direction. This inverter remains on because it's not receiving any signal. If you were to turn both of them off, then what happens is that the middle inverter sends power to both of these inverters, making sure that no signal gets to this lamp. And I'll turn both of them to the off position. The other was on the on. This is how on looks. And this is how off looks. In the off position, then these two handle it. And remember that the on, both of them being on, both of them being off are two different situations, even though the output is the same. These two inverters on the outer edge of it are what ensure that these two inverters are off. Okay. Now, going more complicated is the exclusive NOR gate. This will take one moment to build. It's very similar, and you can actually build these in many different ways. This might be a little bit easier to understand. It's the same thing as an exclusive OR gate, but with an inverter. And that perhaps is the best way to think of it. I'm a little bit slightly used to using a mouse as opposed to a PlayStation 4 control. Okay, An exclusive OR is the reverse of exclusive NOR is the reverse of a NOR gate. Exclusive OR is the reverse of an exclusive OR gate. Whereas in this situation, if both of these are on or both of these are off, then you get an off output. Only when one is on and one is off, you get an on output. The opposite is true here. If you have one of these on and one of these off, you will receive an off output. If both of them are on or both of them are off, then this will be powered. And this is on and off and on. And this works the same way as the exclusive OR. The only difference is that this inverter right here takes whatever the exclusive OR would have given you and switches it to an off position. That's the simplest way to remember it. And many of these, when you use a NOT such as NAND or NOR or XNOR, it works simply like that. You take the whatever it is, an AND gate, and add an inverter to it. Or in the case of an AND gate, you actually take away an inverter because you're working with 3 inverters. An OR gate, the NOR is add an inverter. Exclusive OR, you just add an inverter. Now there's a very specific type of NOR gate called an only gate. You notice that this one pretty much does nothing. When you're working with this, there's only one way that this is going to actually have power. If both of these are off, then there's no power. If this one right here is off or on, it doesn't really matter. However, if this one's on, then this one is also useless. It won't do anything. This is a situation in which you only want this switch to be active. If this switch is off, then you can actually use this switch. And you could think of this almost as a locking mechanism. If this one is on, then if this were a door, then this would be locked. Because it doesn't matter what you do to it. Turning this switch off unlocks it. So in other words, now you can actually interact with it. Or basically have a powered output. And basically this is because as long as this one is on, power goes to here and ensures that this inverter will always be off. And it doesn't really matter what you do with this switch. This on switch will ensure that no power goes to the output. With the power off, it basically have two inverters. And this means that if this is on, then this will be on. If this is off, such as what it is right here, this inverter turns on, turning this inverter off. On, then the on switch sends power to this inverter, turn it off, and this, because there's no power going into this inverter, it means it's back on. Like I said, this is pretty good for you want a situation in which you want something locked. In other words, you don't want someone to actually trigger it or use it unless this switch is in a certain state. There are different ways you can use inverters. Which makes them pretty useful. Now to, if you want to send brief signals, there's a couple ways you can do it. One of the easier ways is to use a comparator. And comparators can be slightly complicated. Now, comparators have two different settings. One of the settings will send pulses, or you can think of it as pulses. And basically, you're doing it by looping it back into itself. Basically, turn it on, turn it off pretty quickly. Now, creating a pulsing situation, basically changing its state on and off quickly, can get a little complicated since you have to get the timing right. But you can delay it, as you can see. And the more repeaters you have, the more of a delay you can create. Now you can make more complicated situations by using a comparator. With a comparator, you can take strength away from a signal that you're working with if you want a certain signal to reach your output. In other words, it's a situation in which you only want the output to happen if a certain amount of power gets to it, or you want to limit your power. And with this one, you can actually set up a situation in which when you're comparing outputs, I guess you could say. Let's get more space. No, that's not a repeater. this is a situation you can think of this as input A and input B. And in this case, because there's a longer delay, the B input is stronger than the A input, leaving this output C to be off. And you can reverse it by giving an A a stronger signal than B. The further the comparator is from the original source signal, the weaker the signal is. It's the same thing you could think of with radios, or and you can see it best right here. As you get further and further away, the signal itself gets weaker and weaker until basically it doesn't power anything at all. Now this doesn't alter how certain things are powered. As long as it gets a signal, then it's powered. But that's not true of a comparator. Because what the comparator does is it compares this signal and this signal. And this plays in with the sorter, automatic sorter. This one will take 1 moment to build. What I'm working on now is a automatic loader and unloader to use a I'm rebuilding it off of my DeviantArt page. It will take a Minecraft with a chest on it and allow you to actually automatically load and unload it. basically what's happening here is that, let's say I want something automatically loaded into a Minecraft a cart, minecart with a chest in it, to send it to some other location. I'd put the items in the chest, and this hopper automatically unloads items into it. It'll unload a specific type of item one at a time. I could preempt it by putting this in, for example. Or, well, half of it. Now what happens is that this comparator is looking at the hopper and asking the question, is this hopper empty? If this hopper is empty, then, well, an important situation is if there's anything in the hopper. If there's anything in the hopper, what happens is that it has a power signal that it sends forward. That power signal turns this off. So in other words, if this is empty, then no power will be sent through this comparator to this inverter right here, meaning the power in this inverter will be on. Since there is something in the hopper, then this inverter is turned off, turning this piston off. Now this is also a visual cue, and one of the things I've noticed too to be useful as well. This basically tells me that there's something in here to load. There's something here waiting to be picked up. No power going through, and this is the comparison right here. Now we'll just put a minecart with a chest in it, and this will unload what's in here. Probably should just do one powered instead of two. Okay. Hopper. Okay, it's unloading the hopper right now. Once it completely loads, then it'll be sent off. Once it's basically sent off and I didn't power it. I forgot something. There we go. Anyway, once it has its load, it should move on its own. Now what happens here is that the minecart will come up here and stop here, where it will unload. And the comparison here is basically, so long as it has something to unload, make sure that this powered rail is off. So as long as that minecart reaches here with something inside of it to unload, then what happens is a signal will be sent to this inverter, turning off this powered line. Basically turning off this, it loops around, turning this inverter off to turn off this powered line, since there's, well, nothing there. If the minecart were to reach here while empty, it would just send it back. And I probably put too much in here. Okay, that was the situation basically. Didn't go as far as I wanted it to. I need to delay this. And there it goes. Sometimes it's a lot easier to make the demonstrations work. Okay. Basically, the minecart has arrived here with things to unload. What's happening now is it's unloading. As long as it has something to unload, this comparator will keep this inverter off, ensuring that no signal gets to the powered rail. And I'll make this a bit easier. And once these are gone, it'll send it back. And now to put more back into it, and you'll see what happens when, I actually should do it slightly differently. It'll unload those 9 and come back. This is what happens if it actually makes it there without anything. And this, what this means is in the ready state. This minecart will stay here until it picks up something. And it really doesn't matter how much you put into it. You could put 1 into it or a few into it, and it'll send it. Sometimes if you put just 1, it might. There's different ways you can actually set this up to. You can set it up to where you can just toss things into it. It all depends on how simplistic you want it. But there's this one way you can transport items from one place to another quickly. Now this leads to slightly more complicated one, and this is a filter. If, for example, you wanted to toss a whole bunch of items into a hopper or to a chest, and you wanted to filter out each of the items and put them into separate chests for you, or let's say you're mining and you don't want to go through the trouble of looking through each chest. Maybe a slightly lazy way of doing it, but valid. It's just a way to make things simpler. Just think of it as a time saver. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to set up a situation in which it will take only a specific item from these hoppers and feed that item into this chest. just to make sure I've got it right. No, yeah, I made a mistake already. Instead of feeding into the hopper, I should have had it feeding into the comparator. If it doesn't feed into the comparator, then it's a little bit complicated, I suppose. It also feeds underneath it, if that makes any sense. But this is, well, I'm doing this to give an input to the comparator itself. Okay, now you can watch how it works. It's going to stop at a certain point. And when you do this, there's a little bit of inefficiency. There's always going to be at least one inside this hopper underneath it. Now the reason it stops here is because basically it's looking for a specific set of items. And what you do is you fill up these things with, well, your first filter, you want to use whatever item that you are going to use as a placeholder. And what you're looking for here is something to hold the place so that a certain amount of items can get into this hopper. In this case, as long as you have 22 items, you're fine. Once you hit 23, it takes one item from the hopper and the first item on the list and sends it directly down. And I'll show you more exactly on how that operates. And now to fill this one. This one's set up right. Could be nice set them up too close to one another, but that shouldn't be a problem. Oh, yeah, I forgot though. So easy to forget things. This inverter on the bottom is what keeps what happens is it's looking for a certain number in here, and that's 22. It sends the power from the comparator. If it has what it needs, it sends power, or, well, doesn't, to make sure that this thing's on. That makes sense. Let me fill up these in the deal. Let's just add. Okay, I'll put. Okay, I'm gonna use grass as a placeholder. Basically, to let something go through, this inverter has to be off. When it hits 23, a signal will be sent through here, turning this inverter off, allowing just long enough to allow one item to go through, if that makes sense. As long as this inverter is on, then this hopper is essentially turned off, which is why there's no I'm going to toss grass in, and you can see it working. It's taking one item and going through, which is why it's switching between 18 and 19. As soon as it hits 23, it sends one item down. And this, it doesn't, you can't see anything through the hopper itself here, but this inverter's turning on and off to allow one item through, basically. As long as it's off, that means an item's going through. So you can also use it as a visual indicator. So I need basically 3 items in which I want to sort. So I'll use dark wood, acacia. I'll use 3 different types of logs, basically. Now what I want to do here is load 1, and I need to take off 1 grass. I load 1 of each into the first position of the hopper. Okay, each hopper now has 1 of the item that I want sorted out. If the item is not programmed to be sorted out, then it will go into this feed out. And I'll use something that's not wood to display that. Lapis lazuli. Acacia dark and lapis. And I'll just throw some grass blocks in there just because. Now this will sort out all the grass blocks, all the birch, all of the acacia, and all of the dark oak wood. And by the end of the experiment, the lapis lazuli should be in this box at the end. And now it's working. This one's taken out all of the grass blocks. And you want to use whatever placeholder as the first filter in case, because if you throw in a placeholder into any of these other ones, it'll throw off the numbers. What will happen is 15 will turn it into 16, and the first block, which is that birch wood, will go through and it'll basically reprogram your filter. It'll mess everything up. So if you do this and you use a placeholder, you want to use you want to just basically dedicate your first filter to handle any of the placeholders that might get into the batch that you're working through. Right now it's working on the dark wood, so you can see it working. It's switching back and forth between 1 and 2. Basically, as soon as one dark wood hits in, it sends it directly down. Basically, it turns the 22 items to 23 items, says I need to eject one. It ejects the first one that it runs into, but it also means that that dark wood wasn't picked up by either of these filters. Now it's working in Acacia. As soon as it hits 23, it sends the very first one on the far left downward, filling up these. That was in there earlier. And that was in there earlier. And that was in there earlier. And the lapis, since none of these filters were set up to pick up any lapis, was deposited in the last chest with no filter. And this is just a way that if you have a whole bunch of items, or you're coming back with a whole bunch of items, just toss them all in the chest and this will automatically sort them all out for you. First one is lapis, and that's filling up. Now when you run into some difficulty, can be certain items that don't stack. You can't do this easily with wooden swords, for example, because you need to have 23 items and you need to not have an empty space. But any item that can stack, it'll do it. So you can't do potions and basically anything that can't stack. And you can't afford to have an empty space to take in the new item that can't stack, because that will also throw off the filter. If you have an empty space, then the next item that goes in there will basically throw things off. Anyway, this has been a Redstone tutorial. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope that the automatic loader and unloader and the automatic filter will help you in your Minecraft worlds. Thank you very much for watching. I'm gonna end the stream now and post it up on YouTube.